very briefly. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I'll have to talk into the mic. We are hopeful, as we mentioned in the press release last week, that we'll be able to announce a date for the radon retesting by ATC or one of its agents next week. The second point I wanted to update the board on is that Mark Esposito, who's our terrific HVAC technician, has spent a great deal of time at Miller Driscoll in the past several weeks, and he plans to be there hopefully on a daily basis at some point every day to continue monitoring our ventilation equipment and to make adjustments as needed. I would point out that he's only one, we only have one HVAC engineer, technician in this district, and we have 750,000 square feet of building. So at this, he has responsibilities in throughout the district. And as you might imagine, it's quite a challenge in this polar vortex world we seem to live in to make sure that the heating equipment's working properly during this unseasonably frigid season. Yesterday, I wanted to report that we restarted the Tools for Schools program with a training session that took place in the professional library for the committees for each school, the Tools for Schools committees. And in addition to these efforts, the school district will be hiring an independent third-party hygienist. This firm will have no connection to the administration or the board and will be charged with reviewing information from earlier testing, conducting thorough indoor air quality testing in the Miller Driscoll School, and providing recommendations for further action if needed. Our intent is to see that this review gets underway within the next few weeks, and once the review and testing is completed, the results will be shared with the community. So I'd like to conclude by saying that based on the available information we have at this time, our school indoor air quality is safe, and I want to reassure the board and the community that as superintendent I take this responsibility very seriously to make sure, and want to make sure that the information that we provide relative to our indoor air quality is reliable. And for this reason, there will be a review of the available information by our outside testing firm as well as further testing. So that's kind of a quick update as to where we are on that front.
Thank you. Once that information is available, is that something that we can present publicly?
Yes, absolutely. I want to make sure, one of the issues, and there's a document that I've tried to refer people to, it's on the Miller Driscoll website, and it's put out by the State Department of Public Health, and it says indoor air quality testing should not be the first move. And I think what it speaks to, I think it's very, very well done. It talks about the fact that the challenges of dealing with an issue like this. There are no standards for indoor air quality. There are numbers that get thrown around, but they're not hard and fast standards as you see in some other areas. And I think what the state has said is the most current ventilation guidelines for acceptable indoor quality are just that, they're guidelines. So there's not the absolutes that some have spoken about. I also think that what's a challenge is interpreting, and I think we've seen this, interpreting the results of whatever testing is done. And that results in and of themselves may add little meaningful information if they're misunderstood. And it's important to try not to make people feel that you're not giving them accurate information. So I think it's important that we do all we can to do that.
I think that may be the same document that I found on the State Health website today. It references the Tools for Schools program, and there's been some interest in the community and having community involvement in this process. Did I read it correctly that Tools for Schools will have community involvement?
Yes, we do. We have, in each committee, there's parent involvement, and the parents are equal, active members of a committee. Parents have gone through the training that occurred yesterday and are part of the inspections of the school that are part of the program and are part of helping formulate recommendations for possible action. And I think it's really important that in addition to parents, we have teachers, the school nurse at each school, the head custodians at the high school, and Middlebrook students, and community members. So it's a broad-based group, and I think we really appreciate their willingness to serve in this way, and I think they'll be very helpful to communicating where we are on the journey, and what if there are any results to report. I think they can do that. I think they'll also be helpful in part of this is an education for all of us. What can we all do, and what are things to be careful of in our school buildings that could promote conditions that are not good or healthy. So I think the committee, as envisioned and as constituted by Tools for Schools, I think will be very helpful to us.
I know the board feels like we've been getting a lot of questions on this. Or other questions we might be interested in at this time?
Yeah. Dr. Richards, recognizing that you yourself are not an HVAC specialist, I just would like you to clarify that if you can, that the cause of the radon tests being negated was because testing protocols were not followed, not because there were any problems that were discovered in the course of the test. It's my understanding that after the fact it was discovered that like windows were left open and that parents weren't notified within the 14-day window prior to the testing occurred. Can you shed a little light on that?
That's accurate. So again, we were required to test 10% of the rooms. We opted to test 100% of the ground floor rooms. There were some windows that were open for a period of time. And as you said, we did not send the letter out to the parents notifying them of the testing. And I think we could have done a better job with just reminding people about the protocols to be followed. So I think that it was a lesson learned, and we are having it retested at no additional cost, and it'll be interesting to compare the findings from the first testing with the retesting to see how that shapes out. In the initial testing, there were no findings of problems with that.
So to be clear, we're going to retest for radon and
Yes.
then bring an independent consultant in to do a more comprehensive full evaluation that may include radon again?
That's true. Yes.
Okay. Other questions? When do you think you'll have, and I'm not going to hold you to this because I understand the contracting process, but when do you think we can anticipate an update on the radon testing and also an update on candidates, independent candidates to do the full analysis?
My hope is that we have it by end of next week.
Okay. Good. Maybe we can get an update at our next board meeting?
Yes.
That'd be great. At this point, then, I'd like to, no other questions? I'd like to move on to the presentation of your budget, after which there'll be an opportunity for public comment. Each commentary will be held to 2 minutes. Wonderful.
Good evening. Thank you for braving the frigid Northeast. I'd like to begin tonight just quickly objectives we have for this evening is one is I'd like to spend a few moments just reviewing with you the process we go through in putting together a budget so that you can get a better feel for how this process works. Secondly, I will present the budget, and you received, if you didn't, there's some at the back of the room, a copy of something we call the super graphic, which is a pictorial, visual, big picture look at our budget. And then I think the most important part, as Mr. Likely said, is after we're finished with the presentation, is to hear from the public. I think the purpose of this tonight is to hear what your thoughts are about the budget, and we're eager to do so. In terms of the process, the budget building process begins early in the fall of each school year and culminates in May. So it's a rather lengthy process that we go through here in Wilton. Some of the things that we do along the way to inform us as we develop a budget, one of the early things we do is an analysis of the facility needs. Principals walk through the building with the maintenance director and with Ken and take a look at some needs for the building. We have, as you know, a 5-year capital and non-recurring plan. So we look at that plan, we see if anything has jumped to the fore that needs to be addressed. That's an important process, I think, that helps us develop some ideas about what we'd like to see in the budget in that small portion of our budget. Another area we look at is insurance and trying to determine what the costs will be. We're a self-funded insurance health benefit plan, and Ken looks very carefully at the cost of insurance and our property liability, other kinds of insurances, and we try to figure out, based on our claims experience in the year and what we project those claims to be going forward, what our insurance expenses will be in the coming year. We also need take some time in the fall to gather information and begin to look at energy costs. Specifically, we go out to bid on our utilities, our oil. We do that with the town, and we generally lock in a price in January for the coming year. So that's something that plays into the budget. Another factor that we look at are enrollment projections. We have a terrific individual in the community who volunteers her service, Ellen Essman, and has done this for many years now. And these enrollment projections are critical in forming the basis for our staffing needs for the coming year. Another area that we look at very carefully is special education programming. Special education represents about 23% of our budget, and we look at each case student by student to see what their needs will be. One of the challenges we face is that we're doing this in November, and the students continue to arrive in the district, and sometimes we get kids moving in well after the budget's made who may have pretty severe needs that we want to and need to service. Another area we look at is professional development and curriculum development. What are we going to do? What do we need to do to improve our courses of study? Are there new courses or programs that we're implementing? What kind of training do we need for staff? Another area is technology. We look at technology, as you know, is an integral part of our instructional and administrative operation. And each year, our tech director, Matt Hepfer, and his staff conduct an assessment of our software and hardware priorities, and we report this to the board as part of our technology planning. By the way, I'd like to introduce my staff who's here at the front, along with our Board of Education, Matt Hepfer, our Director of Technology, and Paul, who's our Special Services Director, Chuck Smith, who's our Assistant Superintendent Instruction, Michael Cicchetti, Interim Director of Human Resources, our wonderful Director of Financial and Planning and Operations, Ken Post, and at the other end of the table, we have our principals, Cheryl Jensen-Gerner, principal at Miller Driscoll, Jen Mitchell, principal at Cider Mill, Maria Coleman at Middlebrook, and Robert O'Donnell at the high school. So I'm so glad they're here. They play a huge role in this process. Finally, we look at our transportation needs to make a determination if we have sufficient capacity to carry out this mandated service in picking up and delivering students and getting them home each day safely. The budget calendar in November, the principals and directors develop their budget based on some of the factors I just alluded to. In December, the cabinet that I just introduced you to meets with each principal and director, and we talk about the budget requests. We decide what items are going to go forward and what items may be tabled, and that helps develop the preliminary budget. We took a preliminary budget to the board at a workshop that we held December 19th. Then, based on some conversation over the holidays, there were some revisions made. We came back for a second workshop on January 9th. and talked more about where we were heading toward this presentation tonight. After this presentation and your comments, there will be another, if we need to, we may have another workshop next week with the board and the administrative team. Then in February, on February 6th, at our next regular board meeting, the board will act on and adopt a budget. And at that point, the budget moves from being the superintendent's budget to the board's budget. Then on February 10th, we meet with the Board of Finance and Board of Education, and leadership have a study session at the professional library. I'm pleased to see our chairman of our Board of Finance, Warren Sarenbetz, is here tonight. Thank you, Warren. On February 12th, we have a capital budget discussion with the Board of Selectmen about our capital bonded budget requests, if there are any. Then on February 25th, if necessary, we have a second workshop with the Board of Finance, and that leads up to, and then we go for a month. And on March 24th, in this room, we'll have the Board of Finance public hearing on the Board of Education budget. On March 25th, also in this room, the next night, the Board of Finance public hearing on the Selectmen's budget and the Board of Ed, Board of Selectmen capital budgets. Then on April 1st through 3rd, the Board of Finance holds its mill rate meetings, and that really drives what the budget will be, ultimately what the decisions are by the Board of Finance in the first week in April. Then our town meeting will be on May 5th, and the voting continued on Saturday, May 10th. So that's kind of a quick overview of our budget process. One of the things that's important and as a basis also that I didn't mention is our strategic plan. On the super graphic, you'll notice on the back side of the second page, this page, there is a statement of our theory of action, which is a series of if statements followed by a then statement. So if we do these things, then students, we believe, will possess the knowledge, skills, values, and passion necessary for lifelong learning and will be responsible, successful, and productive members of the workplace, family, and society in a rapidly changing world. So this is really, this strategic plan encompasses, is a statement really of some of our, it's a roadmap for us. It encompasses some of our core beliefs and our mission as educators. And it helps set the priorities that as we develop this budget. As you can see, it addresses five key areas, curriculum and instruction, the academic, social, and emotional skills, the importance of faculty and staff, community involvement, and developing a budget that will be seen as valuable in the eyes of the community. In terms of the assumptions, budget assumptions, in October, the board had adopted a set of budget assumptions. As you can see, these are some of the objectives we always have for a budget that I'm not going to read through those. You see them and you have them on your sheet. Some of the specific assumptions, and again won't go through all of those. You have a copy of those, I believe, that you may have picked up at the back. One of some of the areas of emphasis that we consider, one is to maintain board-approved practices concerning class size while adjusting staffing patterns to reflect to enrollment changes and achieve cost savings. And what we do is we look very carefully at enrollment, and as you'll see in a few minutes, where we have increases, we may try to increase staff, but as enrollment goes down and it ebbs and flows, we will take staff away. So it's constantly something that we're looking at and as we develop this budget. Another important assumption is that whatever budget we submit and approve meets all federal and state mandates, including IDEIA, which is the umbrella federal legislation which governs special education. A third area is providing the necessary resources to address social and emotional needs of our students so that they can access their academic opportunities. And then two others that I want to mention very quickly, very important since it's our core mission, is that the budget provides for rigorous, relevant curriculum using best practices in instruction, assessment, and digital learning. So these are the things that we really try to keep in focus as we do this. A last item that it's on this year's, the board had put into this year's assumptions, is that the budget reflects continuing cost containment efforts without imposition of participation fees. So the budget you're going to hear about does not include the participation fees that were part of this year's budget. We budgeted about $175,000. So we have not put participation fees in the budget at this time. The super graphic, basically, if you look at the front page of the super graphic, the center section of it contains the overview of the budget. The left-hand side are salaries, and the rest of the areas of the budget go around clockwise on the sheet. And I'm going to just quickly walk you through this document. As you can see in the center slide, the center section, salaries and benefits, about 78% of our budget is dedicated to salary and benefit costs. And that's pretty consistent with I think, most school systems, but that's what ours is for this particular year. Salaries are 59%, as you can see, and as you look at the salaries, about 51% of our budget in salaries, salary budget goes to classroom teachers. If you look up in this corner of the upper left-hand corner, the green areas that are in the green section are certificated positions. These are professionals who are required to have a license to practice, and the blues are classified staff, or support staff. About 51% of our staff salaries are classroom teachers, are classroom teachers. And they represent 31% of our total budget in the district. When you look at this green section, about 82% of our money, as you can see, goes to employees who are working directly with students. And this number would be even higher, I believe, if you were to add the interactions of secretaries, administrators, and some other staff who work with children for much of their day. The employee benefits piece of our budget represents 19% of the total budget. Health benefits, I think there's an improving story to tell with health benefits. They show a 4.8 increase budget to budget. We're continuing to try to control our health care costs. One of the things that we've done, and this is our first year with teachers, administrators, is we've put in a high deductible health insurance plan in our self-funding process, and we will be trying to expand that to the non-union staff and other employees. So the result of doing this is that we have saved about $600,000 by switching to this high deductible plan. So that's very, very significant in our view. Health benefits, as you can see, represent about 77% of the total employee benefits and about 15% of our total budget. Since 80% roughly of our budget is salary and benefits, I think it's important, and we do each year, share what our proposed staffing changes are. We do this by school. There's a district column, and it's broken down into 4 categories, as you can see: classroom teachers, other certified employees, a new category this year, security, and classified employees. The total increase that we are requesting in this in the superintendent's budget is a 9.01 full-time equivalent employee increase. With respect to I mentioned earlier, our enrollment projections. Our enrollment projection for this year was 4,274. Actual enrollments as of October 1st, which is our our student census date was 4,319. So we had about 45 students more than we had budgeted for. Our projections, interestingly, for next year at this time, that Ellen Essman presented in October 30th for 14-15 school year, will be that we will have 4,319 students, which matches our actual current enrollment. The enrollment is projected to stay relatively flat next year, and the proposed budget that you have before you represents a 1.6 full-time equivalent increase in classroom teacher staffing. And in looking at this, I'll walk through it in a moment. There were 4 important priorities in our requests: class size, organizational changes to improve our instructional program, services and supports for students with special needs, and security. If you look at the chart that is on the screen, at Miller Driscoll, I mentioned that when enrollment ebbs and when it goes down, we've reduced staffing. So next year we're proposing to reduce 2 classroom teaching staff at Miller Driscoll. At Cider Mill, we're remaining flat. I'm going to talk in a moment about some redeployment of staff that we have done to improve programming. But at Cider Mill, we are looking at doing some block scheduling so that there will be a slight increase in certified staffing. Again, offset by a decrease in teaching position, and that will help offset the costs there. The class size that we are seeing, class size I mentioned, is an important consideration for us. If you look at the number of sections we have, number of students, these are averages, and we break it out K through 5 by individual classes, numbers of section, and then at the secondary level, grades 6 through 12, we talk about class size with regards to what it looks like in our core academic areas. So you can see the average class sizes range in the K5 level from little 19.8 to 22.2. So this is fairly consistent with where we've been this year with class size. And then you can see below class sizes in English, math, science, social studies, and world language. One of the FTE requests, and I jumped ahead here, I'm going to back up for a minute. One of I skipped over the high school. We had put 3.0 FTEs and paraprofessional position at the high school. So we're looking at 3.5 full-time equivalent positions. Middlebrook, we are redeploying, and we are reducing 1.5 paraprofessional positions, but we're adding a certified math teacher. And then in the district area, in the district part of the budget, there are two things that are different. We have been working with, and several of our administrators, community members are on the Wilton Task Force, Security Task Force. And 2 of the recommendations that have come forward from the task force have been to add an additional school resource officer and to add a mental health professional who would help with the work with promoting security. They were referring to this. There's a job description that the committee has task force put together. It has to deal with threat assessment and working with students to try to make sure if there are kids with problems that could lead to very serious action to themselves or to others, that we need to intervene. And the committee has worked very carefully and thoughtfully on this, the task force, and they've asked us to put this in our budget, in the school's budget. The school resource officer, again, we have 1 resource officer in Wilton that is on the police department budget, and he is spread very thin, trying to get around to all the schools. And I think there was a real sense, particularly at the secondary level, to have greater presence and work with our school resource officers. They're important partners for us in promoting security in our schools. The FTE I mentioned at the high school is going up about 3 because of enrollment increases. Let me talk a little bit very quickly about what Cider Mill is proposing to do. It's a reorganization of staffing and schedules so that teams of teachers can work together to plan and implement more differentiated instruction with students to try to reach students where they are in different levels, and also to provide greater remedial interventions for students who are needing more attention. One of the things that this reorganization will do is to decrease some of the need to schedule some planning time during instructional time. So we try not to pull teachers out of instructional time, but it is very important for them to collaborate as they work to develop programs to meet students' needs. And most of the cost of this proposal is going to be offset by a reduction of 1 5th grade position from the current budget. Another advantage of this program, as we see it, is that it will improve our capacity to meet unanticipated needs without necessarily increasing staffing. So we think this will be a very helpful plan, and I salute Dr. Mitchell and her staff for their work in this. Another position that I mentioned very briefly is the Middlebrook math teacher. It adds a 1.0 certified math teacher for both special education and general education interventions. We feel that this, and we're doing this through some redeployment that addresses the performance gap of students who receive special education services by creating a co-teaching model where you'll have a special ed teacher and a math teacher who has that great deep content expertise in helping youngsters. We feel that it will help build our capacity of the special ed staff to design more rigorous learning experiences for our youngsters, and it will also help us work with our youngsters who are struggling and need some intervention, who may not be in special services programs. The special ed staffing is, I'm going to go back again, Ken. I'm giving you agita here probably by jumping back and forth here. But to go back to the staffing slide, the special education staffing, we're looking to add 5.5 full-time equivalent positions in special ed, that we're reducing some parts of the special ed staffing. Adaptive PE is a reduction, but we have an increase in our numbers of students with serious hearing impairment. We're looking at some this is caseload driven, increased need for speech and language professionals. So we have almost a 1.0 speech and language, some special ed teaching positions, and some additional school psychology time. So these again are caseload driven. And one of the things we've been looking at is that currently as our caseloads, I talked about building the budget in November and not knowing who will be there necessarily in September. And I think that one of the things that we have had to do when we've had surprises or when our caseloads have really jumped up over the summer is that we've had to contract out with outside providers to meet the needs of a related service such as speech and language or occupational physical therapy that we are required. It's a contract we have with the parent to provide services for their child. And what we've had to do sometimes is to resort to outside contracted service providers, which is typically a very costly undertaking for us. So what we've tried to do is to add some full-time equivalents who will alleviate the need to use as much outside, more costly contracted services. That brings us to the part of the budget which is contracted services. It's this part on your graphic. It represents, as you can see, about 13% of our budget, of the total budget. Looking at the pie graph of contracted services, pie chart, you can see the big driver in this are the outplacements, which is 31% of this budget. We have approximately 31 students whose needs are so severe that we can't provide service for them in this district, and who are outplaced in a variety of settings. You look at, I mentioned contracted services. There still are some contracted services that we provide through special ed. That accounts for about 19%. The district itself has contracted services, so this chart is not all special education. It includes other contracted services that the district has. Things like equipment purchases, you can see, is about 10% of this budget. Our supplies, instructional materials and supplies, textbooks and other supplies are all within this area of the budget, which is about 13%. The special ed contracted services and the other contracted services represents about 68% of our total contracted services budget. This is just another way of looking at this, and you can see the dollar amounts for the other contracted services, the special ed contracted services, and the outplacements. So that forms the large part of the total $10 million part of the budget, which is the special or the contracted services. Building operations and facilities represents about 4% of our operating budget. I think there's a really good story to tell in our buildings and operations, particularly with utilities. We've been working for years to promote and make changes that would lead to greater efficiency with our energy consumption. Since 2003-04, we've decreased our electrical usage by about 27%. Our heating oil, since 2003-04, we've decreased by 27%. This budget, if you look at the non-recurring site work, this is the part of our budget where we address some of the physical needs of the district. The bigger, more expensive projects are bonded capital projects, which are not part of our operating budget. It's a whole separate process. And you can see here by school, this is a 5-year plan. I'm going to focus just on the 14-15 year. At Miller Driscoll, we've put $50,000 in this to address as needed issues related to indoor air quality. It's a placeholder. We will see, as was said earlier, what the review of that building shows us, and we will be receiving some recommendations. And so this will help fund what additional testing, if that's needed, or monitoring, or perhaps repairs, ongoing repairs to some of our equipment. At Cider Mill, all three of the 4 buildings, we've put in $170,000 for security enhancements. We have not, there is no figure at Miller Driscoll because the security enhancements will be built into the building project budget. At Cider Mill, we're looking at replacing some ceiling tiles that need replacing. At Middlebrook, their gym floors in the old gym have not been resurfaced for quite some time. We're excited about our STEM program, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And we've done some renovation last summer in preparation for this year. And we still need to do some more work on that room. It's the old industrial arts room that has been renovated into a STEM classroom. Then at the high school, each year, we go through the building, and it's a replacement of some desks or chairs, furnishings sometimes in classrooms. We're also have put in for some mat storage for wrestling mats that are quite heavy and cumbersome, and as we use the field house for many different purposes, it enables us to store the mats quickly and safely. The area of cost containment is one that, as I've mentioned, is something that we're committed to. I think if you look at our collaboration with the town, I mentioned the utilities work that we do with the town in trying to bid for some of our utilities jointly. The other thing that we've done is we added, the town joined our self-funded health benefit program at a savings to the town, which I think is significant each year. In the area of energy, we have continued where as needed to look at relamping, putting in motion sensors to turn off lights that are in areas that are unoccupied, working with HVAC controls to make sure they are in working order. Then other cost-saving measures include things like we buy some of our supplies through consortia, so we engage in consortium purchasing where we can save money. I mentioned high deductible health plans. We also try to do ride sharing for agreements for special education students who are outplaced. Sometimes, for example, Ridgefield may have a student who is at a program in Trumbull, say at CES, and we do a ride share so that it reduces the cost of transporting that student to an outplaced educational environment. The overall budget increase in this budget is 4.82% increase over current budget. This visual representation, I think, shows you some of the elements of some of the big drivers from the building blocks chart, which is on the bottom of the front page of the super graphic. As you can see, most of the increases are due to contracted salary increases for existing employees, accompanying health benefits, outplacement tuition, and special education contracted services. So those were some of the big drivers in our overall 4.8% budget increase. Looking at this budget another way, if you were to look at the special education portion of the budget, this represents 23.2% of our total budget. Budget to budget, special education has increased 9.38% over current year, and as compared with last year, I believe it went up 12%. The majority of the increase comes from outplacements and salaries to existing staff members that are contractually negotiated. A third component, we talked about the regular ed part of the budget, talked about the special education. A third bucket is the security that's new this year. When I mentioned that we've placed funding in this for an additional school resource officer and a threat assessment coordinator. This represents about $247,000 increase over our current spending for security, total spending. So we wanted to make that clear as to what that is. That's a new component in our budget this year. If you look at our budget without special education and security, again, salary increases to existing staff groups, health benefits, staff changes that I mentioned that are enrollment driven, the fact that there are no participation fees, and that our staff replacement, the staff replacement is the savings that we generate when more senior employees leave and we hire newer employees. This year we will be saving $156,000 less. We project to save less than we saved last year. In terms of the total increase of this recommended budget, 50% of this increase is non-special education related, 7% is security related, and 43% is special education related. One of the things I'd like to do before we open it for your comments is on the back side of the super graphic where we were looking at the theory of action and the strategic plan is something that I think is important. The strategic plan work, you can see the boxes, curriculum instruction, community involvement, quality of faculty and staff, and school climate, emotional development. So this really constitutes some of the initiatives that we are working on to improve our district and to keep it moving in a good, positive direction. I also think it's important to note some of and this is a selected list of results that we are very proud of, I think, and it ranges from looking at our academic achievements of students, the success of our students in being accepted into highly competitive and competitive colleges and universities, talks about some snapshots of some of our standardized test results on SAT, on state testing programs, on advanced placement, talks about national merit scholars, and then as you go down through the list, it also talks about some of the programs that we feel represent a real positive return on investment for our schools and for our community. Talks about some of the extracurricular, we have a vibrant arts program, we have a very successful athletic program, and we have also tried to do more outreach with our senior community. These are their schools as well, and we have a very exciting program we've done in the area of the arts, where we've invited seniors into our schools at various times during the year to be part of and to be in the audience and to be entertained by our great musicals and concerts and other programs. So that's, I think, some of the evidence of the fact I think we have earned over the years. I think a reputation as a highly successful school system, I think one of the most successful in our state, in our area, and I think that it's important to remember that. That's a real asset to this community, we believe, and we want to do all we can to keep that the case. So,
I have a couple of questions. Ellen Asman does a great job with the enrollment projections, and she brought up at a prior board meeting that our projections are based on year-to-year, basically birth numbers in the area and some transition numbers, but we don't really track the demographic changes like new developments that may have more families coming in, trends in special ed that may affect our budget heavily. Is the budget at some point, or does the board at some point say, yes, we're going to commission a new study to add those things to our budget considerations and budget assumptions?
Well, I'm curious that you mentioned thank you for your comments, Brian. What the issue of we don't look at the demographics of community, because I send a letter to each family every time a house is sold in Wilton. We get the address, and I send a letter to them with a survey asking them, if they have children, are they planning on sending them to the schools? If they're young children, when can we expect them? So
I was speaking more of, for instance, we have a new development going in right in town.
Right.
Some number of homes, between 8 and 20 homes. They are brand new construction, brand new population for us once they're finished, and they're of a size that, as Ellen pointed out, are perfect for families to come in with 1 or 2 more students each.
Right.
So at what point do we look at those trends in real estate and the trends of people moving in and out, in addition to the basic assumptions that are already well covered in our process?
One of the things to that point, one of the things we've done this year, and the board, when Ellen gave her presentation years ago, we also got a State Department. We do our own survey, projections, and and then the state used to do one, and the guy retired, and he's now doing it privately, And so the board had expressed interest in this, and so we have contracted, we bought his, he did our study for us, so that's information that will, I think, be additional for Ellen, I think will help her. But I think it's also important to point out that, and I can share with you historically how accurate these projections have been. You know, when you think about it, and the accuracy is really for the first couple years out, because as you know, you get beyond 5 years and those kids haven't been born. So you're really in the dark. But over time, the projections have been highly accurate. But I think this additional study that we purchased will help her next year as she does her study.
Shannon White, 33 Millstone, and I will, in full disclosure, say that I am the new minister at Wilton Presbyterian Church, and there are administrators, teachers, parents, and children from the school district in my congregation. So, combat that, as well as people who don't have children in the school system. I picked up my 9th grader today from school, and she said, "You know, Mom, we just came over from the Bedford School District in Bedford." And she said, "I've been talking to my friends, and they said that the regular classes in our district are probably the AP classes in Bedford." And she was noticing the difference in the quality of education that she's getting here. And so what I'm here to say is thank you so much for all of your thoughtful work on this. I realize also as a person in the public sector that it is really important to have the span of looking at caring for those who don't have all of the resources that they need. And so providing for special ed is a greater burden on the community, but it is essential. It is important. So while it is, it costs everyone, but it benefits everyone because we all benefit from people who have the same exposure. So thank you.
Thank you.
Stacy Camary, Belleville Road. I thank all of you sitting at the table and Dr. Richards for your hard work on the budget, and also to thank you for all that you do for our children. I know it's a cold night, and I personally rather be home catching up on the past seasons downtown Abbey, so my 12-year-old might think I'm with it, but I think it's important for them to know that I support their education and I take their education seriously, so that hopefully they will take it seriously. When I looked at the budget, it is, I think like last year, a sort of a little bit status quo. We are have a budget that will cover costs that are projected and needed. And my concern as a parent here in the district is that I look at that budget and the past few years of the budget, and it's not supporting an innovative school system. We live in a town where the median income is roughly $190,000. I recently went back to my hometown this weekend for a family event where the median income is $40,000. My cousins and siblings were talking about how their kindergarten students all had iPads. I drove past my old junior high, and that is an iSTEM school. I realize the constraints that we have and what you're faced with when you're looking at a 4.8 and the Board of Finance is looking at a 1.75. And I'm concerned that in looking at our education and how we move forward, is that the only resources we seem to have is either increase our property tax or implement pay-for-play. And I urge all public officials to look in other ways to create resources within our town. So finally, I'm just asking the Board of Ed, as you look at this budget, and I know you've already had some work sessions, you are elected officials, and yes, I think I'm in the minority who actually go out and vote, but I want you to keep our children in mind and their future, and maybe think a little bit about how we can become an innovative school system. Thank you.
Thank you.
feel like I should be wearing another coat. Kimber Felton on Chicken Street, and I'm speaking as a parent of 3 kids within the school system. I'd like to commend Dr. Richards and the administrators for a strong budget presentation, preserving the class size. I know the last couple of years, Wilson Public Schools has been gearing up for the Common Core, which requires many hours of your time, with not much direction and little money. Thank you. I look at the budget presented and see lots of costs that can't be trimmed due to the law and contractual obligations. I hope you don't find yourself cutting staffing, which would increase the class size and/or impact our kids' excellent education. I'm also a parent with a child with special needs, and to me the SPED budget requires that the board and the town look long-term. As you said, SPED covers a wide range of children with obvious challenges, to students with learning differences such as dyslexia and hearing, to children with social and emotional issues. Our teachers, paras, social workers, psychologists, PTs, occupational therapists, speech, and administrators work hard at giving these wide variety of students the tools for them to learn and become more independent and productive members of society with their own unique gifts. Early intervention is proven to work not only academically, but also socially and emotionally. Thank you for recognizing that. I support the budget as is. And at this point, the only people I think that can be cut when I look at it is the teachers, and I really ask you not to do that. Because to me, the class size and the education is really important to our kids. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Good evening. I wanted to take I'm Maggie Phelps. I live on Crown Pond Lane. I certainly wanted to take the opportunity to thank you, Dr. Richards. That was a really clear presentation. I appreciate all the work that went into it for folks. This is a picture of my son. He's turning 4 on Saturday, and so he's about to celebrate his 1-year anniversary of Wilton Preschool Services, which is a very exciting event in our house. And I brought up Kieran's picture in part because I wrote a letter to my family in April, and I said, this is what autism looks like to me. And I think the thing that's so interesting is that autism looks different with every kid that you look at. And the thing I most appreciate about my experience at Wilton Preschool Services has been the fact that every single staff member, Patty, Fred, the teachers, the paraprofessionals, all of the therapists that Kieran works with, approach Kieran as an individual and are really working to understand what his needs are and how to capitalize on his strengths. And those are so different from the other kids that are there. And so I think that they work extremely, extremely hard. I'm not exactly sure how Tara, the OT, is still standing because there's a lot of work going on over there. Same thing for, the speech paths. And I'm just very grateful to them. I support the budget. I know that it's a big increase that we're looking for, but I've been a homeowner in Wilton without a child. I lived here for 7 years and for almost 4 years now since then, and I'm going to continue to support the Wilton budget. I totally believe in taking care of our kids, and I think it's what sets this town apart. So thank you all, and have a great evening.
Hi, I'm Rebecca LePage. I live on Pheasant Run Road. I apologize that I'm still in my elderly gear. I want to kind of reiterate what everyone else has said and thank both Dr. Richards, the administration, and the Board of Ed for all the hard work and all the consideration you're giving all of our children. Full disclosure, I am also the mother of a special needs child. My daughter has been in Wilton Preschool for just over a year. And I was incredibly fortunate. When you have a child with special needs, there is so much anxiety that comes in every day with parenting, and we've been incredibly fortunate because when she aged into Wilton Preschool Services, her needs were addressed and her needs have been able to be met. And I think Dr. Richards and the administration really wants to do that for every child that ages into the school, whether they're in the preschool or the upper schools. I think when you look at the special ed budget especially, a lot of people look and say, well, that's a big increase, and why do they need all these service providers? What why do we need another one? There seem to be so many speech and language pathologists. And I can tell you that there are parents whose children are aging into the school district or whose children are in the school district who have changing needs, who aren't able to get the services that the school is telling them their children needs. And as a parent who hasn't been in that situation, I can't imagine the added stress that could cause. And I would just like to speak out in support of the budget for the parents who right now aren't here or are here and don't want to say, my kid needs this, please give it to them, because that's a really vulnerable position to be in. And that when you look at the numbers, it seems like a big increase, but if you look at the children, all we're asking for is what they need. And I'd like to thank you in advance for giving those kids the attention they deserve.
Thank you, Dr.
Maria Wilcox, 2 Brandon Circle. As I've been studying this terrific document, thank you for all the numbers. I like all the numbers. Thinking, how can we convince everyone else in the town that all these increases are needed? And when I first looked at it, I was shocked. I'm like, you're actually adding teachers? The high school? I don't think I've been here where we've added teachers. I thought maybe that's a good statistic. We might tell people, hey, we haven't added any teachers at the high school for 5 years. I don't really know if that's what it is, but it just seems to me that we haven't added teachers for a very long time. So maybe the town should know that we haven't done it, so it's time. Also, I was talking to another parent today, and we talked today about how some of the special education costs over and beyond a certain calculation come back to us from the state. And I understand
excess cost reimbursement.
Right, and I understand why you wouldn't budget that per se, or why that's not in these numbers. But again, that might be a number that town people should know, because that money will come back. So the special education budget really isn't costing taxpayers as much as it is in your numbers here, if I understand it correctly. Is that right? That's correct?
We are reimbursed for students who exceed 4.5 times the per pupil cost. So we pay for the first roughly $70,000. So if a student, some of our very impacted kids might cost $200,000. The state reimburses us above that $70,000. Depends, the level of reimbursement varies from 75 to 90% some years. So we don't know. And then once have met if we have an overage in special education because of outplacement costs, for example, the reimbursement money helps make us whole on that, and the remainder goes to the town.
And that's a terrific, but there's never any numbers to that. So it might be really interesting for me to know how much money really did come back and how much less really it didn't cost us special outplacements this much money. And actually, in actuality, it cost us this because we did get that money back. That might make, and I'm not trying to tell anybody how to do the job at all. I'm just, by any means, but just trying to, how are we going to convince everyone else in the town that this is, a terrific budget, which I really think it is. And I do fully support. And again, class size, obviously, as reported, is the most important thing in the classroom. So that's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Maria. Anyone else?
Hi, my name is Samantha Eskenazi, 25 Baltimore Road. I have a first grader in the system, and I also have a 4-year-old who's in the preschool services. Thank you for all your hard work. My daughter has, it's cold. My daughter has received a tremendous amount of support and care from the preschool. I'm really emotional. So I want to thank you, and I hope that we can maybe in the future reduce the number of contact services so that we can get the children support and services that they need.
My wife and I have one of our 3 daughters has some special needs, and my wife was a principal in California, and we went to a meeting with her teacher, with our daughter's teacher, and my wife just burst out in tears, and I said, "So much for professional objectivity." And so when it's your child, that's really, and I know I was speaking to a group of special ed parents and talking about my daughter and what the schools had done, and I lost it. So I said, that's quite understandable. So
I support the special education budget. I do hope that some of the outsourcing that we do can really that more children are needing services. So I hope that can be reduced because it seems like that's a high number on the budget. And these people are absolutely wonderful. So thank you.
Well, I think one thing to keep in perspective about this, especially, and I've said this to a lot of groups that I've spoken to about this topic, and that is that, like, for example, some of the paraprofessional support. When you go into a classroom, not only the youngsters who are receiving some paraprofessional support are getting help, but also kids who are not in the program. So it benefits, in a sense, all of our students. And I think it's also important to note that the overwhelming majority of our students in special education spend most of their time in mainstream kind of classes. So our goal is to try to do as much as we can to include them as quickly and as effectively as we can in the program. So we're going to continue to do all we can to support your child and other children as well. Thank you.
Just to be another voice I have one child with special needs. I moved here from the south side of Chicago, where my daughter, basically my choices were self-contained classroom or a class of 24 kids, half of whom had IEPs and one para. And that's when it became clear to me that we couldn't use that school system.
Right.
So it's wonderful to be here. My daughter started in the preschool when she was 5. Every year she's needed a few less services, a little less speech, a little OT. Spending most of her time in the regular classroom and barely hanging on with the academics, but hanging on nonetheless with all the wonderful support of the teachers, support staff, and paraprofessionals. So I just wanted to speak on behalf of this budget and to say thank you to everyone for all their wonderful work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Beth Johnson, Middlebrook Farm Road. Again, thank you all for all your hard work, year long. Thank you, Gary, for staying with us until June. Appreciate that. I just want to say a few things. The teacher's contract, this is the last year of the teacher's contract, I believe, right? In the first year, we held to no increases. So some of these, is that correct? So some of these increases we've known about for a long time, for as long as the contract's been out there. So those are not controllable. The benefits that go with those increases are not controllable. The special ed mandates are not controllable by us. They're mandated by the government. The town has, put my glasses on, sorry. The town security task force is recommending a school resource officer and mental health professional. Those are not within our control, and they're great ideas, and I fully support all of these programs and ideas. But if the Board of Finance is going to say 1.75%, and at least half of this 4.8% is not controllable, I don't know how we get there without drastic cuts that are going to hurt the general education and all of the students and the reputation of the town. So I'm very concerned about the Board of Finance's 1.75% because I just don't see it as achievable without big decreases in the quality of our education. So, and I hope they're listening to all these people who say the budget is good as it stands. I support it. I thank you for all you've done, and I don't want to see it cut. Thank you.
Anyone else? I don't know about you, but I'm shivering up here. So I truly thank you. I think, unfortunately, sometimes civility can be a casualty, and it's certainly not been a problem tonight, and it hasn't been in the past, and I applaud you for that. And I wish you safety, a safe home, and thanks for your interest and your attendance here tonight. So thank you.